Heyo. I decided it's been too long since I've been cyberbullied as a 25-year-old on the internet, so let's talk about queerness in cartoons, focusing on Western animated series. While a great deal of TV and film has seen a rise in queer rep, animation, predominantly children's animation, has seen this exponentially. I want to cover a few topics like significant milestones, the ongoing argument of what counts as queerbaiting, last episodism, queer coding, and the fact this queer rep is still predominantly white. I know this sounds like I'm being a negative Nancy, but I also hope to highlight the strides animation has taken and give kudos to the people who fought for it. I don't want to gloss anything over, so please check the description for spoilers and severity. Queer coding in media is often interpretive and often, but not always, accidental. We've been conditioned to see romantic vibes more easily between a man and a woman. I highly doubt Masashi Kishimoto intended for Naruto and Sasuke's bond to be anything short of brotherhood turned rivalry, but that doesn't mean the interpretation doesn't have its credits. After all, valid interpretations exist beyond every canon. In the 80s and 90s, openly queer characters were usually walking stereotypes. Queer-coded characters, on the other hand, were allowed dynamic personalities. I'm not saying these characters were intended to be viewed as queer, but some of them have been overwhelmingly interpreted as such. To be queer-coded doesn't require the creator's intent because, again, the concept of canon has always been the tip of an iceberg, and toxic online discourse is the Titanic doing the doggy paddle at full speed. As social media becomes more and more prevalent, the lines between canon and theory blur. Creators may retweet a fan theory and suddenly everyone is debating if that's the same thing as confirmation. I respect Owen Dennis's commitment to Death of the Author. It's great that show creators can interact with fans online so easily, but it often leads to out-of-context statements, turning into disappointment, or credit being taken without the work being put in. Owen Dennis, that's the creator of Infinity Train by the way, always makes note of his original intent instead of a solid yes or no. Actually, we have two on-topic examples, so that's super convenient. Fans suggested he meant to code Lake as trans and Ryan and Minky as having romantic feelings for one another.
I spent my whole existence living your life. I'm going my own way now.
You stuck with me. So now you're stuck with me. Let's play already.
Owen didn't discount how the fans interpreted these stories, but he didn't lie and take credit for something he didn't intend to do. Lake's story is about identity, however people take that, and Ryan and Minky, much like Jesse and Lake, are shown to have a unique dynamic that can be interpreted however a viewer pleases. I don't know, I guess my takeaway is that we somehow went from queer-coded villains to queer-coded Metal Mario, so that's a win, I think. I have mixed feelings about Korosami, but most of that is chalked up to how poorly the show handled romance in general, a hill I'll die on, and not how the show handled its final pairing. If I'm being honest, I started shipping Korra and Asami out of spite when I grew sick of how much brooding Mako x Korra and Mako x Asami stuff there was. Imagine my shock when Korra and Asami held hands, entered a magical light beam, and made slightly longer than usual eye contact?
Oh yeah.
It's one of those things where you just knew. Sure, it last episodism to last episodism by adding ambiguous bi shit in its final minutes, but people were happy. This was a major Nickelodeon cartoon, its predecessor being one of the most renowned cartoons to date. Its face of romance was two bi women of color, but, and there's always that but at the same time, I can't fault people for being a little upset with how much praise this garnered despite it being nothing more than one set of eyeballs looking at another set of eyeballs. Of course, I don't fault the writers when the writers are usually the ones lobbying for rep. It's not that fans were pissed at them, they were pissed at the situation. Luckily, this was the start, not the end. Rebecca Sugar is arguably one of the biggest names at Cartoon Network, and they played a huge role in that era of flapjack-adjacent cartoons and the rising inclusion of music in Cartoon Network animation. When you think about the songs Rebecca Sugar put out, I'm Just Your Problem is up there. Back then, this wasn't set to be canon. The one good thing about Adventure Time being the one piece of Western animation is that by the time the final season was released in 2018, the bigwigs were starting to realize that maybe they could profit off of this whole gay thing. When Season 3, Episode 10, What Was Missing came out, fans went ballistic. Naturally, when you see a vampire lady with a partially shaved head mocking a pretty pink princess, you assume they're fated for an overflowing number of enemies to lovers fanfics on Wattpad or something.
Hey, Marceline.
Hello, Bonnabelle.
Yeah.
But that's all in the fans' heads. However, Rebecca Sugar had a gay dream, and suddenly, the heavy subtext was that Princess Bubblegum and Marceline used to date. Her favorite belonging is a shirt Marceline gave her, and this song is definitely about an angsty breakup, right? Still, back then, despite whatever subtext and subtle coding there was, the canon story was that Bubblegum and Marceline used to be friends. Just friends. In fact, the Adventure Time affiliated podcast, Mathematical, touched on the topic as if it was more than hearsay, and someone lost their job. Unfortunately, there's a trend in television with networks claiming to be progressive while punishing those who quote-unquote push the envelope.
Disney was recently found out to be donating large sums of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to the sponsors and co-sponsors of the Don't Say Gay bill.
After Cartoon Network started to realize that the Venn diagram of queer people and people who watch too many cartoons is a circle, Bubblegum and Marceline were not only made canon, but their backstory was included in the 2020 Distant Lands release, Obsidian. While this special cured everything ever wrong with me, ever, and Monster's the most romantic song to exist, Marceline and Bubblegum still technically fall under that last episode as an umbrella, even if their dynamic was extremely fleshed out since day one, just not confirmed. Was that always how shows did it? Like every other cartoon, Steven Universe had its problems in the writing room, but it was the catalyst, God, I've been waiting to use that word, that helped other creators lobby for their ideas to be included in cartoons. It wasn't just one or two characters whose queerness was part of the canon. Pearl's complicated love for Rose Quartz is a huge aspect of her character.
You won and she chose you and she loved you and she's gone.
Garnet is literally a pair of lesbians who U-hauled into the same person. Even the idea of fusion and how many others can't understand it, maybe for different reasons, feels inherently queer. The fact there was an on-screen wedding was a huge deal. I didn't even see Steven Universe at the time, but if you watched cartoons, chances are you saw this online everywhere that day. After that, it felt like every creator was considering what they'd be able to include in their stories.
I support this.
Can't make a video without mentioning 2018 She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, right? The heart of this Netflix original is a jock with a sword and her toxic ex-cat girlfriend. We have a pair of wives whose primary character traits are loving each other, we have bi bitches and a non-binary shapeshifter, yes, it's a tired trope, and somehow the queerest thing of all in the show is Seahawk. This is when cartoon watchers were starting to notice that it no longer had to be snuck in. The heart of the story is queer love, and while many people have their issues with the way Catra and Adora were written, it couldn't be denied that their toxic pining was holding up 5 seasons of whatever other plot was going on. The problem? Many people pointed out that the viewers championing SPOP for its queer rep weren't acknowledging how white the show is. It's great to talk about the diversity on screen, but if the people getting paid to write these stories are all white, how much is performative? We can celebrate how progressive these shows feel, but for many of these series, white people are, in some cases quite literally, giving voices to people of color. No, I'm not attacking N.D. Stevenson. I'm saying that we tend to forget the writing room holds far more weight than what actually makes it on screen. I don't think it's wrong to celebrate what we see in cartoons now, but I think it's wrong to assume it's a win for everyone. Another big point to bring up with SPOP is that it's a reboot. Trust me, that matters when you approach online discourse surrounding the show. I feel like the hot topic of 2018 was the fact this 80s sex icon was rebranded to wear shorts.
She got pants now.
And obviously most people didn't care, but whenever you tamper with older franchises, especially those as popular as the Masters of the Universe, this frustration may instead read as an unwillingness to see characters change, and it sometimes is. But as someone who also loves the 80s originals, let's face it, the plot was held back by the fact it was, again, existing in the 80s.
No excuses! You know I hate flowers more than anything. They're too pretty.
But to say SPOP wasn't as good as the original is a little dramatic. Are the League of Legends people mad that Arcane lesbiafied some characters? Or are they happy that the show was working well as a standalone story and is pulling in new fans to the universe? Yeah, this is a big one. I usually don't watch shows until a few seasons are out, but I was into the Owl House from the start. I think this was the first time I saw 2 female characters interact and thought, I'm not entirely sure this will disappoint me. The thing is, this show was clearly written by someone who wanted a queer protagonist. It was a matter of whether we'd get to see that confirmed on screen. And get this, last episodism is dying. It used to be you got last episodism or you got queerbaiting. If you wanted something slow burn, it was all coding, and if you wanted something canon, it was only brought to fruition at the very end of the show. But the Owl House? The Owl House delivered enemies to frenemies to friends to unrequited crush to requited crush to girlfriends, and oh wow, it was only the second season. And the Owl House not only had queer protagonist kids, but queer adults. Rain, a non-binary bard, Ida, the bisexual MILF, loving dads. The Owl House also managed a balance between normalizing queer identities while casually mentioning some of the real-world aspects of it. Luz comes out to her mom, and her mom is an ally, casual placard stuff. The show is arguably one of the most popular cartoons today, and a large reason behind that is how much it raised the bar for queer rep in animation. So you may have noticed this video, while focused on queer rep in cartoons, is mostly covered by sapphic romance. Maybe it was deemed that this was the most palatable form of queerness media, but it's a little exhausting that when it comes to anyone who isn't a woman, we started and stopped at Benson from Kipo, and that wasn't much of the story. Again, definitely not blaming Kipo. The show wasn't heavily focused on romance for anyone, so Benson coming out to Kipo and later bagging a boyfriend was actually quite fitting.
I'm gay!
Oh. Oh.
But this was just about the only mainstream show at the time that had a queer male lead. Enter Dead End Paranormal Park. Everything aside, this is an underrated series about found family and redefining ideas of good and evil. But on top of that, the protagonist is a gay trans dude named Barney who, you guessed it, has blue hair and pronouns, motherfucker. Jokes aside, Barney's character is complex. He learns to be a better friend, already was a great brother, and he's an awkward romantic, and it's adorable. Until now, most cartoons aim to normalize being gay and being trans by having no homophobia or transphobia. Even in the Owl House, Luz comes out to a fully supportive mom, and everyone else who hates her because she's human, not because she's bi.
Girlfriend? Oh no, that won't do. We'll find you a new girlfriend.
But Dead End demonstrated both ends of the spectrum. In Phoenix Parks, people accept Barney. At home, not so much. It's not dark enough that it feels like trauma porn, but it doesn't discount the struggles that come hand in hand with being a trans teen.
Nobody cares that I'm trans. Nobody cares about my weight. Nobody's asking me stupid questions about my binder.
And the thing about Dead End is that there's variety. Barney has a super cute relationship with Logs, a total himbo. But Norma, her feelings for Vadya are unrequited. She comes out to her mom, she faces heartbreak, and she starts healing. For the past few years, being gay in a cartoon was like a get-out-of-jail-free card, where writers were too afraid to follow in the footsteps of the bury your gays trope, and wanted to make their queer stories the happy ones. But that's what's great about this show. We see it all. We see young queer kids in love, and we see young queer kids face heartbreak. Lastly, I want to touch on Courtney's gender and why Hamish Steele chose to do a blind casting for the role, instead of making the character non-binary like in the comic series Dead Endia. I mentioned before that Double Trouble from SPOP, while a fan favorite character, fills a long-running trope of non-binary characters not being human. I'm just going to direct quote this Film Days article instead of using my own words. Although author Steele confirmed that Courtney is non-binary and uses any and all pronouns in the original graphic novel series, Courtney uses exclusively she/her pronouns in Dead End Paranormal Park to avoid stereotypical tropes of non-human portrayal which are harmful to the gender non-conforming community. Essentially, the show had an open casting for Courtney and planned to copy and paste the gender of whoever they hired. Hannah Montana's bestie snagged the role, and the rest is history. Like most bitches, I started shipping these two and burning the candle back in 2015, and I never, and I mean confidently never, thought this was going to be in the realm of possibilities. They were a popular pairing, but all of their development could be written off as platonic. In season 6, when their dynamic started fostering a more romantic element, many fans called pandering. But the thing is, Bumblebee, that's the ship name, isn't that cute, was still developing. Yeah, the writers have changed their course of action and left my favorite himbo out to dry, but they didn't shove these two together like Barbies and say, now kiss. They spent a few seasons building them up. Was it perfect? No. Was it void of any backing? Definitely not. We all got to a certain point when we realized, oh, Rooster Teeth is actually doing this.
That's what I'm doing!
Hey, Oscar and I are hitting the movies if anyone wants
Yep.
to... Oh, okay.
It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And with RWBY, that could have easily been when they released season 10 in 2027. Their scene's cute, and while I'm still struggling with this season as a whole, it didn't feel rushed when compared to how the series typically handles its romantic subplots. It's weird because RWBY has been going on for a decade, but in its course, all of these other shows happened. They realized profitability, gained courage, and now two protagonists are not only canon, but were made canon at a midway point in the series. But there isn't a better place in this video to talk about queerbaiting, because whether or not this was ultimately confirmed, the hot topic of discussion for a while was whether or not their dynamic counted as baiting. Queerbaiting, a buzzword a few years back, is when a show, book, movie, etc. profits or gains popularity from teasing queer characters without actually confirming or putting in the effort to actually write the queer characters. This definitely exists, but people started tossing the term around willy-nilly and called queerbait on shows that were still ongoing or developing. What's next is the big question. To be honest, this video only looks at a fraction of the history of queer rep in cartoons. Again, I narrowed in on Western animated series, but think of Sailor Moon, or think of all the movies that have queer rep. The last decade has been monumental in shaping the history of queer cartoons, and I think it's safe to say this isn't the end of it.